Let me introduce you the speakers. Amar Bisht is a senior manager in the wealth strategy and advisory at Orbium. Amar has been working in the private banking industry for more than 16 years. His focus is on regulatory implementation. He helped private banks design, implement, and enhance investment suitability framework. His global experience has been gained from the United States, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Amar holds an MBA on strategy and finance and a bachelor in electrical and electronics engineering. Raffael Maio is the COO and co-founder of NetGuardians. He has a security software engineering background. He's a keen entrepreneur. He finished his studies in the Silicon Valley to terminate his bachelor in software engineering and hold an MBA. Raffael worked for a few multinationals before starting NetGuardians 10 years ago. This NetGuardians webinar series is on investment suitability, the rise of Robo-Surveillance. I leave now the floor to Amar.
By Orbium, I would have a lot more context and I need we paper is on Orbium website, which is published as well as article on website. The packet or the with the that I'll talk about investment practices framework, and then Raffael will that can be automation is helping the paradigm in terms of more powerful. So currently, investment suitability, there's increasing regulatory pressure worldwide. We have a global audience for our webinar. So, in Europe, we've seen it too, and in India, there are new circulars which have come up from the AME as February, as well as guidance from the NS. Shows that investment suitability regulations are constantly evolving. So, because of the changing nature of the regulation and new regulations coming up, implementing a robust framework is not straightforward. And two observations. One, that banks tend to add people fixes to their investment suitability framework. And what that means is that taking a step back, it's not really a client-centric process of selling or of implementing investment suitability. It's more driven by, here's the regulation, let's see how we can fix it quickly. Often what that leads to, such kind of implementation mindset leads to issues with the implementation, and that it results in implementation exercises in terms of time, the resources spent, as well as potential litigation from clients who feel that they've been missold products. So again, to retain their focus on growth and avoid from regulators, banks must ensure that they are compliant with regulations and especially to investment suitability. We'll now touch upon what are the best practices. So here we present to you investment suitability framework. Again, you can read more details about it in the white paper. So investment suitability framework, basically it helps, how Orbium helps our clients is, we use this framework to first, benchmark clients' investment suitability practices against what we reckon are the 5 main pillars of the framework, and then the gaps that have been identified, we can help rapidly address those. So we'll move on to each of the 5 portions of the 5 elements of the framework. The first one is client profiling, and by that we mean that banks must have a systematic collection of information on each client to create a risk profile for that client. Again, this is fairly standard, and banks do tend to have a client profile. But the key here is that in coming up with the client profile, all relevant factors are taken into account, and there's a long list of it. Some of the significant ones are identified: investment objective, capacity to sustain risk, and it's important that all the elements are captured. Otherwise, that's one of the areas where if there's client profiling or this systematic bias in the profile itself. Some of the best practices that we encourage clients, and what we've seen happen is that instead of making it just a tick box exercise whereby a client filling out a form, it's always good to have a conversation or a discussion between the client and the banker, so that if the banker sees that a client has entered 2 answers in the form which kind of contradict each other, and there can be a good discussion around it. It helps the banker and the bank to better understand the client. And second is, this should not be a one-off exercise. There should be periodic reviews of the profile. If the client's circumstances have, then those should be captured on a regular basis. Some of the best practices make this happen almost on a yearly basis as well. Next is the product rating, again, which most banks have adopted. So this is an obligation to rate all the products, generally on a scale. On one end are the low risk products, so the deposits, cash, and then going all the way to the high risk, which accumulators, structured products, etc., that the bank offers to clients. And the product rating, again, should to account multiple factors like risk, complexity, liquidity. Again, some of the best practice that we want to highlight is that the methodology to rate the product should be used just in case there are circumstances that have changed. And more importantly, that if a client is holding products where the risk rating changes, then the client should be informed. So this conversation should take place quickly, because it will help the client understand the risk in the portfolio that has changed because of the recent product, and then both the bank or the client can take appropriate action. We move to the third one, which is at the heart of the investment suitability framework, which is the pre-trade controls and disclosure. Given the time duration that we have, and as a suitability topic, we're going to stick to, which is all about rules, we're going to stick to the timing. So what I would say is, in brief, that for every transaction, the suitability should be assessed, either pre-trade, and in particular, the mismatches need to be identified. Again, there can be different types of mismatches. There is risk mismatch, concentration, tenor, knowledge and experience. And that's one thing that should happen. And second, for that particular product that's being sold, the relevant risks and features associated with the product should be disclosed to the clients, so that they can be informed, can acknowledge that they understand the product that is sold. As you can see, that this becomes this is the heart of suitability, and adopting manual processes here becomes very, very difficult, because what you want your sales force to do is focus on selling and not really looking through a long list of rules to see whether they're whether they're making the right sale. So some of the best practices is to actually build a core banking system, which then allows relationship managers to deal with the proposed trade. And what this can then do is automate the mismatch checks. So it's almost like building intelligence of the system so that relationship managers are immediately prompted of what mismatches have occurred and what disclosures is to make. So building intelligence into the system and institutionalizing this knowledge. We'll move on to the next key element of our framework, surveillance. And this is a topic that will be covered further by Raffael in today's webinar. But surveillance is a key part of investment suitability. You might have the right framework, you might have all the rules, but then what you want to do is gauge whether the organization and the bankers are actually adhering to the rules. So to do this, banks must monitor investment that is made by a client to ensure that it is suitable to the profile for that client. So this means looking through the transactions, hearing the voice logs, looking at the products that have been for example, term sheets that have been sent out, making sure that holistically that meets all suitability obligations. Given that large private banks conduct hundreds and thousands of trades on a daily basis, this opens up the whole area of sampling, and some banks tend to do sampling, a larger size, some do a more conservative size. And I think in today's webinar, when we go further ahead, Raffael will talk about how using an automated approach, you can, instead of doing a sampling, you can actually perform surveillance on all your transactions to catch any unsuitable trades or trades where progress has not been. Again, some of the best practices to make sure that the surveillance team is independent of the front office, and also what we've seen is very helpful is have suitability dashboards which are almost automated so that systematic risks can be captured, and these systematic risks will become evident over time or over analyzing large volumes of transactions or by slicing and dicing the data by looking at it through booking centers or particular RMs, which makes it a much easier. And again, doing this manually remains a difficult task to complete. Finally, and an important topic that shouldn't, an important element of investment suitability is the organizational culture, and this is around how do you incentivize your RMs to do the right thing. So if, and here what we mean two things. One, the incentive structure should not encourage RMs to push riskier products to clients. That these riskier products may be perhaps giving more revenue or in-house products, but again, it's selling the right products to the client. And second, on an overall remuneration scale, so the incentives must not measure RMs only by the revenue that they generate. So the adherence to the rules should also be taken into account. Again, best practices use a balanced scorecard that measures relationship performance, a broad range of metrics, takes into account, of course, revenue, but also takes into account other factors. So these are the key elements of investment. In the time we touched upon them, I'd encourage you to read the white paper that has a lot more information on these topics. I'll now hand it over to Raffael to talk through the limitations of the manual.
So thank you, Amar, for this explanation and best practice framework. Let's step back a minute to understand the actual context and the limit of it. So today, the current practice adopted by most financial institutions is to have dedicated teams to ensure that suitability obligations have been met. These teams are constantly growing year over year as compliance needs have drastically evolved over the years. And these trends will definitely continue because the regulators continue to come with new circulars every single day. Consequently, these situations leads to a lack of scalability. Indeed, we cannot continue to enlarge teams each time there is a new regulation. And at the same time, the volume of transactions is significantly growing, which makes it really difficult to have 100% coverage due to the amount of transactions. And that's why This led institutions to work with a sampling methodology for their review. And by doing this type of sampling review, that means you might miss some traits. As a second important point, is related to the manual data handling. Indeed, most of the time it's spent by users on simply retrieving the corresponding information on the various systems, crossing this information together, building some Excel file to do some reconciliation. So just the fact of gathering this information is already extremely time consuming. So of course this approach is consuming and the cost related to compliance people is very high and not effective. Indeed, the compliance people are high skills profile and having them just retrieving information is not necessarily the best usage of it. I've seen some institutions carrying more than 10 steps just to gather the data and put it in some Excel or own format. So lastly, all this personal handling this large amount of data introduce a factor of numerous opportunity for error. And these human factors make it very difficult to have information real time. Indeed, gathering information manually do not allow you to have it in real time. So let's see how we can turn out this limitation to opportunity through digitalization. So why should we continue to have this centric approach in regard to surveillance? Why shouldn't we have 100% coverage? Today, the technology allows us to handle millions of transactions within a second. With big data technology, it becomes extremely easy to do so. So the first point is to automate the process of collecting and setting up controls. This will enable cover 100% transaction coverage. So we remove this manual aspect of gathering data. As a second benefit, with such automation and digitalization of control, we will free up some time of your compliance team to focus only on important cases. This will also bring to the bank a better agility. Indeed, the bank will be able to act instantaneously when something happens, to report instantaneously to regulators or act directly to take action when something is discovered. And finally, the technology-based approach allows a systematic structure and a full record of process in every case. This addresses serious weaknesses with current best practices that rely on email and lack on structured documents. So now we can really focus and have trails on any single action that is performed. So this digitalization will clearly help communication with regulators, with managers, by having proof of compliance at any single time. On a single click, you can retrieve information at any time. So, at the end, how can we implement such an automation framework? In order to set up a successful digitalization operation system, we suggest to work in a 5-step automation framework. We start with different areas, one by one, in order to have really a successful framework. So the first step is data extraction. Indeed, banks rely often on really complex IT infrastructure with hundreds of systems, from network to core banking application to database. Often systems function as silos. meaning they do not necessarily communicate within each other, making it extremely complex to finally work together, because each of these silos are run by different people, by different teams. Sometimes these people are even not in the same building, so it makes it difficult manually to retrieve that information, to start doing cross-link between the information. For instance, if you have a database having some information and some trade from another system, first getting these two systems, if it's in silos and held by different teams, it's already complex. The first step is the data extraction to eradicate this problem of complexity of different systems. The second step is data modeling. This pillar is very important. The information that is extracted, often on these different silos, they have their own format. And all these formats do not necessarily correspond with the format of other systems, meaning it becomes difficult to make them communicate together. So each one of these systems has its own language. So therefore, it needs to be assembled into a standard structure to enable the system to correlate information together. So the system, this pillar, needs to transform the virtual data extracted from the existing application and feed that data to a model that should be versatile enough to handle any type of scenario and to put any type of data together. This brings us to the third step, that is the engine. So the platform should provide advanced data analytics to detect unusual patterns in behavior. Of course, such a platform should rely on big data technology. Indeed, as mentioned earlier, we've seen that today's volume of transactions really growing significantly. On some institutions, we are talking on hundreds of thousands of trades per day. So the platform developed by NetGuardians is based on two-stage analytics: the dynamic profiling and the predictive analytics, both helping to detect the unusual. The goal of the platform, the engine, in fact, is to help compliance staff, compliance officers, to spend time on the different transactions that is unusual, and not to look at any single trade, because the compliance officer will not be able to do all trade manually. But the engine will be able to go through the 100,000 of trades in a single amount of time and pop out only the ones that are unusual. The fourth step is the representation system. The representation system is important in order to have an efficient solution. Indeed, you need a comprehensive representation of your cases. This allowing your operator, compliance officer to handle case efficiently. Because when you can have these dashboards that are meaningful, that makes it easier for an operator to navigate and understand what happened, it becomes much easier to handle the case than when it's a simple line on Excel with maybe hundreds of columns. So the representative dashboard should be meaningful to the people that have to handle cases. And the goal is really to use them in their day-to-day operations. And the last step is the workflow management system. In order to have, indeed, in order to have an efficient solution, we need to cover and follow each stage of an investigation process. For instance, the detection of an exception should trigger automatically reports, and structured workflow that cover each stage of the investigation. Each single comment, remark made by different officer or even relationship manager is tracked and stored, making tamper-proof compliance, because you can come at any single time and ensure and know what has been done by whom. In fact, this ensures compliance staff to follow a consistent, standardized approach to resolve cases. And on a few clicks, you can extract that information to give that to the regulator if they ask you a proof of compliance. So let's go through some examples of automated controls. Let's take a couple of examples. Let's assume we have a relationship manager who sells some products to his client. And at the same time, we have another system that handles all the training that the employees perform. For instance, the system will retrieve information from the training database as well as all single trades that have been done previously. The system will automatically trigger a notification, an exception, if, for instance, the relationship manager sold the product to his client where he hasn't performed a training in the last 24 months. As for MiFID, you cannot sell a product that you are not aware of. You have to sell a product to clients that you know that are in adequation with the needs of the client. And of course, you haven't performed any training on it. How can you claim that you know what you sell to your client? So that's only a single example of type of control that can be fully automated, allowing staff to only perform activity when the exception is raised, and not to perform check on things that are correct and normal. So what are the benefits for such an approach? The benefit basically is to save you time, to save more than 80% of the time of the banker, spending their time efficiently on specific unusual cases. Also, it's to provide a transparency on regulatory authorities, to be able on few clicks to come with reports and give them to the regulator. To prove compliance at any time, dispose of a scalable solution to foresee the new regulations. Recently, Thomson Reuters mentioned that any single day there is more than 155 regulations that are amended, which makes it a tremendous work for compliance staff operating in order to always keep up to date with systems. And of course, such a solution framework allows you 100% surveillance in real time and an early detection of compliance issues. So I will leave the floor now to Amar for the closing remarks.